mission of the division is something that guides this process, which is to manage, conserve, restore the state's unique aquatic resources for present and future generations throughout the process. And this is, generally what I tell people is when, we come out with a proposal like this, we move forward with rules, nobody should be perfectly happy. If you consider all of the different resources and how people use them for different reasons in different ways, and then generally what people, they tend to focus in on what they do and not view the broader picture too. So everybody feels what they do is the best conservation-minded way of doing it, and it's the other people who are the problem. And so when you start to kind of go through and, okay, some guys are doing it purely for fun. Some are doing it for subsistence, to put food on the table. Some of it, the subsistence in particular, tends to be cultural as well. It's part of their cultural practices. And then obviously we have commercial use of the resources as well. So through this process, we spent a lot of time and effort trying to pull apart different, what we call stakeholder groups. Specific groups of folks, and having smaller meetings to really get at how they use the resource, how this would affect them, what they support. And as I hinted to, I'm pretty sure nobody's going to be completely happy, and that's a sign of a good proposal. At one level anyway. A lot of what's driving this is community concern, and these are just a few examples forwarded to me by various people of the kind of things that are circulating around on the internet, email, social media, whatever. Again, just kind of this mentality of catch as much as you can. Clearly if this is going on night after night in certain areas, it's going to very quickly have an impact on the resource. And so one of the main concerns from the community was this kind of wholesale overfishing, but then also how do you protect against that? Even though we initially started just talking about size limits, we quickly around Maui morphed into bag limits as one way to kind of prevent this overharvest, particularly in certain species. Just some historic reference. Oftentimes we're caught up in our daily lives and we think this overfishing and this concern over the resources is a recent thing. This is just some stuff we pulled out from 1902. There's a citation, fisheries in Honolulu were falling rapidly due to localized overfishing. 1923, in a Hawaiian newspaper, some food saying, why are there so much fish in the days of our ancestors and so little in our time? So already in the early 90s, people were concerned. 1925, Fish and Game Commissioner talked about wasteful methods, destructive fishing techniques, pollution, and overfishing. 1927, much less. Hawaiian reef fish were much less abundant several decades earlier, and many common species were now rare. This was in a citation, a book. And 1955 is one that I've shown before, but in one of our Fish and Game reports, they basically say examination of commercial fish catch reports have disclosed that the most desirable game and food fishes in shallow inshore areas are on a declining trend and have deteriorated to such an extent that the need for sound conservation measures is urgent. Okay. Really, if you look at our regulations, we came up with some minimum size regulations and things throughout the 50s through the 70s and so forth, and then there wasn't much done for a long time. In 2000, I think it was in 2002, we revised a lot of those minimum sizes, but we only dealt with fish that were already regulated. And so after that, 2002, we haven't done any meaningful fishing regulations. There's been a few marine managed areas and things of that sort, but just haven't really done any meaningful fisheries regulation changes. 1998, I just wanted to put in one survey. This is one of the more recent, older surveys we had. There was a bunch of surveys done in the 80s as well that had similar impact. The key is that the majority, and this is targeting fishers, most of them were on Oahu, 87%. The rest were on Maui and Hawaii. But, 73% wanted to see more enforcement at that time. It was in the late 90s. 67% wanted more FMAs. fisheries management areas, so not a no-take area, but an area that's a little more strictly regulated for some reason. MLCDs are not always no-take, but are oftentimes viewed as a no-take type of reserve. So 44% wanted that, but only 43% were against it. So it was split, kind of like how it is today. You know, that's a topic that tends to be fairly split. Marine recreational fishing licenses, 50% wanted that at the time. Gill nets restricted or banned, 80%. Obviously, this is before we had the gill net rules. One of the keys, though, to this survey was that 20% felt the fishery was in terrible shape, 37% felt it was in poor shape. So over 50% in the late 90s felt fishery was in really poor or terrible shape, and something that obviously needed to be done. You know, we can look at different types of data. We have some, what I would term fisheries dependent data sets, which come from catches, fishing catch. And then we also, I'll talk about more, is our fisheries independent assessments, where we go out and actually do visual census. The real point of this graph is, you know, we've got commercial catch data from the late 40s on. Prior to that, though, we had this big period of time with no data. But there was some work done in the 1900s that was pretty extensive to assess the commercial coastal species landings. And, you know, a lot could be wrong with that data. I know certainly our commercial catch data is not validated. It's completed by the fishermen. They're required to do it, but it's not usually validated to make sure it's accurate. So there could be some worms in this, but it gives us a sense of the fact that the fishery probably declined quite substantially in that early 1900 time frame when some of those quotes were coming out as well. So people were seeing a decline at that time. And bear in mind that in more recent years we got technology that helps as well, GPSs, depth sounders, and so forth. This is from our commercial catch data, and it's corrected for effort in the source of per fisher. And it's just kind of a really gross way of correcting for the amount of effort, but generally you can see that there's been that quick decline in the late 40s through the 70s, and then things have kind of more or less stayed the same, but at a much lower level than they once were. The importance of kind of looking at the commercial fishing industry is that whenever we do regulations, we have to come up with an assessment of how it's going to affect business. There's a small business review board we're going to have to go in front of. And so we kind of want to know what is the impact. If we do some kind of regulation that's going to adversely affect commercial fishing, what is the economic impact of that going to be? How many people are going to, you know, substantially feel it in their livelihood? So what we did is we pulled commercial catch data, as well as the sales from dealers and so forth, and combined them, and we came up with a number of fishermen in terms of how much reef fish we're selling. This is, for reef fish, we're not including a puli, okalu, or any of those kind of coastal pelagics. We're just including things like goatfish and parrotfish and things that actually reside on the reefs or around the reefs. So the lion's share of commercial fishermen don't sell any reef fish, and this makes sense. They're out, most fishermen are out on boats, deep sea bottom fishing or pelagic fishing. Of those, 412 might catch reef fish once in a while, but their sales are less than $1,000 per year. This is statewide. The key is all the way down at the bottom, there are 13 fishermen statewide who report sales in excess of $20,000. And just so it's helpful for you to know how this kind of works, I cannot release any information to the public from our commercial data that shows or is composed of less than 3 fishermen. I can report stuff that has 3. So when you see a number like 13 fishermen in excess of 20,000, the reason we don't have like a 30,000 or a 40,000 or a 50,000 figure is because there's too few fishermen for me to report at that level. So 13, you can guess that the lion's share of those are selling less than 30,000, or we'd have another category. Breaking it down by island, same kind of parameters or concerns. So we just looked at sales in excess of $1,000. There's 9 fishermen for Maui, 0 on Lanai, reporting sales in excess of $1,000. And I could go a little further with Maui, down to 3 fishermen reporting sales in excess of 10,000. But I can't go any further with the data than that. I think we all know that the commercial fishing industry is a little bigger than that, obviously, just from what we see or hear. But that's what's being recorded on our report. So that's what we're using officially to represent what the impact to the commercial fishing industry would be. One thing that comes up a lot when we talk about any kind of regulations is what is the relative impact of commercial fishing in terms of take, pounds or numbers versus recreational or non-commercial, I should call it. I always am a little hesitant to even show these because the data is so questionable for all of it. The non-commercial comes from our Hawaii Marine Recreational Fishing Survey. Guys go out in the field, they interview fishermen, they determine their catch, and then they expand that data using an estimate of effort. So they don't know how many people are fishing, so they have a process where they use phone surveys, calling people and asking them how often they fish and whatnot to come up with a total amount of effort, and they expand it. The phone surveys are questionable. So I show it here because it's the best data we have, but I would imagine that, it's not that accurate. There's a big amount of variability there. The commercial data is what they're reporting to us. And again, from the previous graphs, there's some question about whether or not they're accurately reporting everything they're catching. But either way, with the 2 data sets, you're looking at somewhere about 3 to 4 times the catch from the non-commercial sector than from the commercial sector. And again, very small number of commercial fishermen. Okay, so because of some of the concerns about the fishery dependent data, we use it, we try to compare as much as possible. We do count a lot on our fisheries independent data, our visual census work. And of course there's some pluses and minuses to this as well. But you got to get in the water and count the fish. So they got to be the kind of fish that are in a place where you can count them. A lot of species of fish, mullet, things of that sort tend to be in these dirty estuaries and in sandy areas where you just can't really see them very often. The large uluas around Maui anyway don't tend to be in the shallow reef areas during the day when we're out there. So they're probably not census too well. So you just got to kind of take those things into consideration. But what this does allow us to do, we don't have a whole lot of good trend data this way, but what we do have is the ability to compare using the same methods, different management styles or different areas. And in this particular graph, you can just see the 3 circles here. Open or partially protected areas being gray and yellow. The red and pink being community managed or no-take reserves, and then the green being the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. You can see from there there's quite a big difference depending on management style. But another way that we can group it is by population and accessibility. So in this particular graph, using the same kind of visual census data, we come up with biomass, which you can barely see the scale there, but biomass is grams of fish per unit area. In this case, it's grams per meter squared. So when we do our fish surveys, we constrain ourselves to a width of reef on a set path. We measure the distance we cover, and then we can figure out how much, and we estimate the size of the fish. So then you can kind of come up with a weight of fish per unit area and then compare it. So Oahu, it's got the lowest, it's down around 20 or so grams per meter square. Other heavily populated areas might be like Kihei, Lahaina, Kahului maybe. It's around 25 or 30. Moderately populated areas, Haiku, Paia, areas of that extent, closer to 50, 45 or so. And then our remote, our inaccessible areas are kind of like North Shore, Northeast, all the way to Hana, the kind of cliffy, hard to get to areas. Big Island's got a lot of these areas, just rugged coastlines. That's doing quite well compared to the other sites, close to 70 or so. However, when compared to the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, again, quite a bit lower. Even the best of our sites are about a third or a fourth. And the big difference is apex predators, the blue graph. Okay, so this is probably nothing new to you guys, but this is just kind of background again for the general statewide concern with resources. For this particular rule package I mentioned, we went through several years of meeting, or a year and a half, 2 years, 3 full rounds. The first round started in 2009, was just go out and say, hey, we got concerns, we're going to concentrate on goatfish, parrotfish, and jacks. We want to know what you guys think. It was really pretty much an open book, and we got a lot of comments from the public saying that they weren't confident that size limits alone would achieve anything. They wanted bag limits. And then, there was other things like different types of gear, banning scuba spear, nighttime spear, all kinds of stuff. But for this effort, we decided to focus on regulated species. Minimum size, bag limits, things of that sort. We had large meetings, and Emily helped facilitate at least one of those meetings too. But we were required to kind of announce and hold a big meeting. Could be anywhere from 30 people to 200 or so. And so to make it the most productive kind of scoping, information gathering meeting we could, we broke the groups up into smaller groups and kind of facilitated a sit around, talk story, kind of like small groups like this kind of format. Then we also went out and either sought out stakeholder groups and invited them for specific meetings, like commercial fishermen, spear fishermen, recreational pole fishermen, go to clubs. So those kinds of meetings. And we went to Hana. We had several meetings with the community out in Hana. Things of that sort. In addition to all of this facilitated information gathering, we also had a questionnaire, or a couple questionnaires. We kind of changed them as we moved through. And the current proposed rules will talk about, kind of reflect all of this public concern as well as the best available science to kind of guide the process. One thing to make note of is we used and relied heavily as kind of an overarching principle, not just our mission that I talked about earlier, but also this policy by the Land Board from 1998 that prioritizes resource management to the highest priority being the resources themselves, natural or cultural. Second, the public's right or ability to utilize those resources, followed only if the others can be met with commercial use of the resources. So questions will come up, well, if we make this bag limit really strict, that's going to do away with commercial fishing. Perhaps, but it is only in the cases where we felt the resources needed that level of protection that we did that. And according to this policy, that's in line with what the department thinks is the appropriate approach. So if commercial fishing no longer can, well, they're the last tier anyway, and we want to try to protect the general public's use.